Wanted first of all to thank for the very warm hospitality here of Mustafa Wajid and the rest of the World Utility Summit. Very nice. And just a bit of a stretching exercise before I start, I want to ask everyone to raise their right hand if they are using emails. I'm not going to give up to anyone, you know. I will ask to pause my 10 minutes, yeah. And now for the next question, I leave you the freedom to decide which hand to raise if you're using WhatsApp. WhatsApp, yeah. So the reason I'm asking that is 20 years ago, barely any of you used emails. By the way, today, if there were anyone here under 20 years old, most probably, they wouldn't raise their hands because my kids tell me that emails are for old people. They don't use emails anymore. 20 years ago, telecom companies made all the revenues by counting minutes that we spoke on. Never mind if those were old telephones, mobile telephones. This didn't change the business model for telecom companies. 10 years ago, they made a lot of their revenues from internet services. No one thought about WhatsApp. No one knew what WhatsApp is. No one could imagine what WhatsApp would be. Today, the telephone companies are not making any money on phone calls. Never mind if those are mobiles or from handsets. Everyone is using WhatsApp. Still, all the telecom companies, or let's call it the IT industry and the communication industry, we can't call it telco anymore, are doing very well. Completely different world than what we used to have. So it was mentioned that I'm coming from the IT world, the information technology, right? So I'm a bit different probably here because I started to get engaged with the energy world only about 4 or 5 years ago. And probably this gives me a bit of a different perspective. You know, I heard here a lot of discussions about what utilities think. Well, the questions here, if we think that it would be challenging for utilities to change the playground, and I was probably one of the few ones that said, no, I don't think it would be challenging. And the reason is, the question was not, would it be challenging for the utilities? It was, would it be challenging to change the playground? I think that the playground is being changed for the utilities. And I think that the main question, you know, Philip, you've mentioned a very interesting point that you ask utilities. And the question is, will they be the ones that we need to ask how the world would look? Maybe yes, maybe not. So I want to go over a few points about decarbonization as a driver for innovation. And we know that necessity is probably the best driver for inventions. I think that decarbonization is not a necessity. And I heard here a lot of people talking about that, but also people mentioning that it's not really a need. You know, if you think that this is a necessity, I invite you to go outside, ask the first rickshaw driver that you meet, how much does he care about decarbonization? So it's a necessity for the world, but it's not a necessity for the people. And what would really drive the world is what every person needs and people need, and if you mentioned that as well, and also here is power, that you have available power. This is really a necessity. Now, good for us is that governments do understand that decarbonization is a need for the world, and that's why we have a lot of supporting policies. And the supporting policies, together with this need, started to drive some innovation. But very, very important because there is a limit to how much supporting policies we can have. So we have some supporting policies which also led to some available funds, perceptions of people. But those came together with what really drives the world, which is today, for example, the urbanization and the new energy needs. We didn't have so much dependency on energy as we have today. A few people mentioned here, for example, off-grid villages in Africa, in India, in China. 20 years ago, they could live without energy. Today, the most important need that in most places they have is how do they have energy for their mobile phones. So the world has changed, and this is what people do care about. Now, decarbonization started the innovation, but it was not enough. But now it's come together with the other needs of the world, and that's what really drives the world. But innovation by itself is not enough. So there is a very, very distinct difference between inventions and disruptive innovation. I give here this example So the wheel by itself, a great invention. But this was not a disruptive innovation by itself. Having the carriage by itself, yes, this was a complete different change. Suddenly you could carry commodities and people for long distances. But in order to move from an invention to a disruptive innovation, you need to have, first of all, the enabling technologies. And you need a lot of technologies to have a carriage. You know, I wouldn't know how to build one now today. You need brakes, you need suspensions, you need various things. You need to have new players, the companies that will actually build carriage, people that would drive carriage. It's a whole different players, a whole different playground. And eventually enabling regulations. Those are not supporting, those are enabling regulations to ensure, you know, who can drive, where, do you need a license, and everything like that. So you need to have all those in place in order to completely change the world. Now let's try to see what's happening today in the energy world. So we have enabling technologies. It started with energy, and decarbonization was a great driver because today we have a lot of renewables, new technologies, including the distributed generation. Distributed generation doesn't always have to be renewable, but the distributed generation is certainly a major drive. We still don't have completely solved the energy storage issue, but we have a lot of new energy devices. And then, based on that, in order to completely change the playground and the technologies, and that's how come I, from the IT, started to get engaged with energy, you did a lot of communication to be able to communicate to the different elements to enable some mobility there. Then you started to have huge amount of data. What do you do with all this data? So it's analyzing all these big data, security to ensure that we do have actually power all the time, that this is secured, and securing also the privacy of people. And then various applications, both core applications and end user applications, because this starts to be a very, very dynamic industry. And it's a huge change from the current static industry. Today, you generate electricity, you send the electricity, even where you have distributed generation. You generate the electricity locally or the energy locally, you send it out, whoever uses it, whoever doesn't. We're changing it to a completely different world, very similar to the mobile world. So we have today the enabling technologies, and they are in place today. Of course, they will be improved, but they are in place. Then we have new players. So alternative power sources brought various different new players into the world, various developers that can go there. Same goes with distributed generation, energy efficiency with energy service companies, various energy services, so rather than just selling you electricity, we have energy services companies, and we have the prosumers, which today actually every customer can already produce electricity, and we have the customers and the productions coming together. So there is a whole world of new players. A lot of the people that I met here belong somehow to those new players. So we have new technologies, we have new players. And we have already a new playground. Smart cities, which was mentioned here a few times. So the minute that we have smart energy, it goes very well together with smart cities. Smart cities are a major driver for the changing world of technologies. Smart grid enables a much more mobile and adaptable and flexible and agile infrastructure. Empowered consumers with smart grid and with smart cities, suddenly consumers have a choice. You know, I live in Israel. In Israel, we have one state-owned utility. But today they have a problem because there are a lot of IPPs, of private generation. Suddenly, customers have a choice, and they are going to have more and more choices. Microgrids, and those are both off-grid and on-grid. So off-grid power is also a whole new world. You can have a 5 kilowatt distributed generation in various off-grid locations. So the playground today is completely different than the playground that we used to have. So we have today the enabling technologies already in place. We have new players in place. We're going to see more and more new players. Why do you need a utility if you can have distributed generation in one location and microgrids that can connect one to the other? So those may be system integrators, might be the municipalities will be the players. No one knows, and we have the new playground. What we still lack are the enabling regulations. And that's actually the main thing that I see today stopping between the current world and the disruptive innovation. Now, what would be the role of the utilities in this new world, I don't think that we know exactly, but I know that a lot of the utilities that I speak with are looking about what sort of services they are going to drive. What would be actually the revenue generation for them? Just if I go back to the example of the telcos, so they used to make their money exactly just like the energy utilities. They counted how many minutes we spoke on the phone. 20 years ago, no one could imagine a different world. When I speak to the people here that are engaged with the energy world, they tell me, well, come on, those are giants.
1 minute.
They will continue, okay? They will continue to count the minutes that we use energy. But we can see the example there. We can see, by the way, a different example from the postal services. They didn't adapt in the right direction. So I don't know what the utility new services will be. There are a lot of options. They can look in content, services, diversification. No one knows. But it's certain, I'm pretty certain that the world is going to change. But as a last word, that's what I believe. But it's very hard to predict, especially the future. So I think that we have a lot of innovation, but still, we'll need to see how it evolves. Thank you.